Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. So, social media, email, Substack will be provided for you in this episode. And audio platforms, for some few examples here, I'm on Audible, Amazon Music, Spotify for podcasters, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and taking things further and pushing out to where you enjoy your podcast. I am on that. So this episode is about the particular artist and movie I think relate to the essence of the mamas and the papas. And also I'm going to give my thoughts and more of an analysis and breakdown of the movie that I think particularly relates to the mamas and the papas, the style, and relay that back to mamas and the papas, and relay that back to this particular artist, I think, and the reasons why. Okay, so let's dive in. All right, so the movie that I'm focusing in on is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino. So it's based off of a book, and the main character, and this goes along with the territory, that he's more brute in the book than he is in the movie. And all of these things correlate to the reasons why I think that it ties into the mamas and the papas. So particularly from how it encapsulates, and it is a very detailed example of the type of imagery that was behind the 60s. So how it breaks down, it's delivered as in a point of view from this perspective that the real world events that happen could be changed and altered, particularly to where it changed the course of history. So, for instance, the Manson family. So, because of the particular character that I'm getting into with Leonardo DiCaprio's character, because he took a stance and his disposition of going against the instinct, well, not going against, going within the instinct of what seemed unusual to him, he was able to stop the most heinous crimes that were committed by Charles Manson. And in an act of that, it revolved and it changed the history of where Shannon Tate is still alive. And so me mentioning this and tying this into the mamas and the papas, particularly the scene in which Sharon Tate was at a party, particularly I think it was a Playboy Mansion party, and how it shows the depiction of the aspect of how the 60s was a revolutionary and a changing atmosphere for people, particularly with the social norms and the conviction, particularly diving into the idea of what it's meant to what is meant to be socially acceptable as far as relationships. And you see how when you're looking at this, when you see this movie, it's as if you're going into the point of view of the actors. And I think it's very interesting because Quentin Tarantino did that, particularly with a lot of his movies, where these movies were particularly made for the actors in this universe. So in this universe, none of this, the tragedies and everything that happens with the mamas, Mama Cass particularly, didn't happen. And so the embellishment and the everything else with living their lives, it alludes to the whole idea of that tragedy doesn't sweep into their music to end so soon. The backbone of the trio, well, not the trio, but the backbone of the artist, the group, that is. And I'm saying them as a trio because, I'm thinking about Wilson Phillips and all that, and how how they harmonized, and it seemed like it was just a small group of them, just three of them, but it was more than that. So, needless to say with that. So within that, you hear this depiction of California dreaming. And so Bobby Womack, I had mentioned him, and I had talked about, particularly when I was covering the aspects of love songs in February, about If You Think You're Lonely Now. And I think his rendition of California Dreaming, it gives the rawness and the soulful empathy of telling the story of how the Hollywood life can be very draining, and the reality of the situation of, we see that these people are a part of the integral grain of entertainment, and the essence of entertainment, putting on a show and making people happy. But at the end of the day, stopping the production, and the production stops, and they go on to their everyday life. Within that, I think it's very compelling how this song interfolds into this particular scene to amplify that idea. And I think it amplifies the idea even more so about the reasons why and the reason for the group, the Mamas and the Papas. So, rock, particularly folk rock, is one of those things that, and particularly with the Mamas and the Papas, how they catapulted the feelings and the ideas of talking about stuff that's against the establishment, and how they're presenting these things. They're using rock to emphasize their points of the ideas of how you stand and how people stand, particularly how people's youthful stance at that time in the 60s, and melving your way through it. And in essence, rock I think that was the whole purpose of this particular genre, to speak out against things and to mirror things and to give a sense of outlet for angst, particularly. But besides angst, to give the importance of looking within the self, of anxieties and hopes and failures, and talking about these things, and not particularly cookie cutting things, which is a reason for me to use this term, because, pop, for all of its use, when it's good, it's good, and what's bad, it's really bad. But for at the most center of pop, for the most part, it's about happiness and the content of things, and just staying within a bubble of that. But I think putting the essence of folk in it, it gives the tradition of highlighting the nature of human nature, and to where country does those aspects, to where the aspects of family, the aspects of addiction to things, and how people become plagued by behavior and patterns, and addressing those things and talking about it. And I think Johnny Cash amplified that at its best when he talked about certain things in his music, and the list goes on with that. Oh my gosh. Gene Autry was more happy-go-lucky, but Willie Nelson and the Oak Ridge Boys at some point, and Dolly Parton, and it's just so many great artists to look upon, particularly in the 70s, in the 60s, and so forth, and all of these things. And it's really something to focus in on and think about. Okay, so Waiting Around to Die by Townes Van Zandt. It was part of the album For the Sake of the Song of 68. And Waiting Around to Die, Townes Van Zandt is a lost soul bouncing around through life seeking distraction from the awareness of his own mortality. He seeks that distraction first in gambling and drinking, then in codeine. In some ways, the song echoes Van Zandt's struggle with substance abuse, but the character he portrays in the song is fictional. The character comes from a harsh upbringing of abuse and abandonment. After his mother ditches the family, he has his heart broken by a girl in a bar in Tuscaloosa, Tennessee. This accelerates his downward slide, leading to robbery, prison, and finally the grim comfort of addiction. Van Zandt did indeed struggle with alcoholism and heroin. Not quite codeine, but also an opiate. But he came from brighter circumstances. Some would go so far as to say he was privileged. His family had proud Texan roots, and his father was a corporate lawyer. Van Zandt attended the University of Colorado at Boulder in 62 and the University of Houston in 65. Still despite some differences in detail, the song's character seems to mirror Van Zant's psyche. In the song, Van Zant never outright says he's destroying himself in order to hide from the pain of his despair. But that's the gist of the chorus. They change slightly from the verse to verse, but each time they imply that life itself is just a period of waiting around to die. Rather than wait around for the reaper to come, Van Zant's character figures he might as well pummel himself into oblivion with booze and bad living. Van Zant was diagnosed with depression in his sophomore year of college. In 1998, his sister told Texas Monthly that she thought his main problem was that he was highly sensitive to the injustices of the world. Van Zant's close friend and fellow musician Guy Clark related a story that may be a look inside of Van Zant's existential disposition. He said that in grade school, Van Zant learned that the sun is slowly burning out. Upon hearing that, he could find no reason to take much of anything seriously, and certainly not the daily responsibilities of life. Clark doesn't have this as a dark or negative realization on Van Zant's part, but it backs up the idea that Van Zant was preoccupied with the seemingly nature of existence. Waiting Around to Die was Van Zant's first single and won at least 2 occasions. The 1976 documentary Heart-Worn Highways and a 1993 interview with Austin, Texas disc jockey Larry Monroe. He said it was the first song he ever wrote. In the biop Be Here to Love Me, Van Zant's first wife, Fran, says that he wrote the song in a walk-in closet that he converted to a home studio in their apartment. She was disappointed because she'd been expecting a love song or at least something happier. When Van Zant performs this song on Heart-Worn Highways, an old man can be seen crying just behind him. The sincerity of the old man's grief has touched many people and inspired questions on comment boards about who he was. Clips isolating Waiting Around to Die lack the introduction that he gets early in the film. Writer Megan Garvey provides more background in the March through April 2024 edition of County Highway, Volume 1, Issue 5, to be in detailed. Of that, if you're interested. The old man's name was Seymour Washington. Many called him Uncle Seymour. Van Zant introduces him as such earlier in Heart-Worn Highways, when he does a brief and informal interview. Washington lived in the Clarksville neighborhood of Austin, Texas, where Van Zant's position of Heart-Worn Highways was filmed. Born in 1896, he was a career blacksmith and a singer in his church. He died before Heart-Worn Highways was released to the public. I want to close saying these little bitty bits about Tom Van Zant, his musical style, wrapping up. So, I remember hearing, when I first heard Waiting Around to Die, hearing this song, when I was in the midst of driving and going from different towns, because at that time in my life, I was traveling a lot for work, and then due to living far out, and came across the song, and it caught my attention. It caught my attention in how it is if I was listening to a movie, but it was a song, and then it encapsulates also the spirit of the 60s, and how a lot of times there were songs like that where it took you on a journey. And that's what Mamas and the Papas, their song style does. It takes you on a journey and everything. And then even down to the detail of the hitting the chords, and I'm trying to think about the musical instruments of, I guess, a horn or something that was in the background. It was typical of what you would hear. I don't think it's a horn, but what you would hear in the background of a spaghetti western, and getting that rustic feeling, those imageries in your mind about spaghetti westerns, and the themes in spaghetti westerns, standing your ground against things, good versus evil, all these things that plague men, temptation, humility, all of these things. It's really something. Alright, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. So on Friday, I'm going to wrap everything up talking about the songs of the Mamas and the Papas. Tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. Bye-bye now.